Have you ever wondered why France has been so much involved in Africa, especially in the Sahel region? Former French President Jacques Chirac once said, France would become a third world country without Africa. Now, it seems to be happening as France and French corporations are facing massive losses after they have been kicked out from Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. Recently, it has been revealed that Air France has faced a collective loss of 65 million euros because it was kicked out of the Sahel region. The loss has been so painful that Air France wants to return to the Sahel region. However, Ibrahim Traore from Burkina Faso and other military leaders in Mali and Niger will never let that happen. So what desperate actions France is making for an immediate return to Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, and what losses it is facing? In this video, let's know about that. For decades, France relied on Africa as its economic backbone, extracting wealth while maintaining geopolitical leverage over the continent. However, after revolutionary military leaders come to power in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, things have changed entirely. They brought a watershed moment for France, a major shock that has rattled France and French companies. The expulsion of French troops, corporations, and political influence from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso has shattered France's economic stranglehold over the region. Nowhere is this decline more visible than in the financial devastation faced by Air France, which has lost over 65 million euros since being forced out of the Sahel. For Air France, the Sahel was more than just another destination. It was a highly profitable monopoly. The airline generated staggering daily revenues, 500 million CFA francs from Mali, 430 million from Niger, and 390 million from Burkina Faso, adding up to over 2 million euros per day. This level of profit was a reflection of just how deeply France depended on the Sahel for economic survival. And we are only talking about one of the hundreds of companies. But with the rise of military-led governments in these nations and their firm rejection of French dominance, Air France was pushed out, cutting off one of its most lucrative revenue streams. The result has been a financial catastrophe, leaving the airline scrambling to regain access to the region. However, the new governments have made it clear that the era of France's unchecked exploitation is over. The revolutionary leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger represent a new era of African governance, one that prioritizes sovereignty over submission. These leaders have taken bold steps to dismantle France's economic and military grip on their countries. That's because they know the reason France has leverage is because of the financial benefits it gets from Africa. If these are stopped, France will no longer have the financial backing that gives it international support. You should know that France has long maintained an image of economic strength and industrial power, but much of its success was built on resources it did not actually possess. Despite having little to no significant reserves of gold, uranium, and critical minerals, France remained a major exporter of these commodities for decades. These resources were not French, they were African. France extracted them from its former colonies, rebranded them as its own, and profited while African nations remained underdeveloped. One of the biggest examples of this exploitation was gold. France has no major gold mines, yet it exported vast quantities of the precious metal. The source has always been West African nations like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, where French companies controlled mining operations under unfair contracts. These deals ensured that African countries received only a small fraction of the wealth generated, while the gold was refined in France and sold as a French commodity. On this, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni openly exposed France on live TV. Now, with Sahel nations reclaiming their resources and kicking out French companies, France's so-called gold exports have all but disappeared, revealing how dependent it was on African wealth. The same pattern applies to uranium, coltan, cobalt, and lithium, essential minerals for modern technology, electric vehicles, and batteries. France does not have significant reserves of these minerals, yet it remains an important player in the high-tech industry. But that is changing. Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali's rejection of French influence is not just about political autonomy, but also about dismantling the structural economic dependence that kept Africa subservient to France. This movement gained momentum through a series of military coups that fundamentally altered the power dynamics in the Sahel. The overthrow of pro-French regimes was not merely about local politics, but an outright rejection of France's neo-colonial dominance. Paris reacted with fury, attempting to impose sanctions, severing diplomatic ties, and seeking to isolate the new governments. Yet these actions only accelerated France's downfall in the region. Instead of bowing to external pressure, the new leadership expelled French troops, shut down French embassies, and nationalized key industries that were once controlled by French corporations. Among the most symbolic and financially devastating blows was the removal of Air France, cutting off a major economic artery for France. For decades, Air France was more than just an airline. It was a strategic economic weapon, ensuring France's continued control over African air travel. The airline dictated flight routes, monopolized key connections, and extracted wealth from the region while reinvesting little into local economies. Air France maintained a near-total monopoly on flights between the Sahel and Europe, keeping fares artificially high while providing subpar services compared to other international carriers. This system funneled enormous sums of money out of Africa and into French corporate coffers, reinforcing France's economic grip on the region. However, when the revolutionary government seized power, they began to question why Air France was allowed to operate so freely while contributing so little to African nations. When the airline abruptly suspended flights in response to political changes, the Sahel nations responded by banning Air France from returning and exploring alternative partnerships. Mali's Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop openly criticized the airline's arrogance and exploitative business practices, exposing how it routinely canceled flights without accountability, stranding African passengers in Europe and elsewhere. He pointed out that such reckless behavior would never be tolerated in the US or other Western nations, yet Air France felt it could do as it pleased in Africa. That era, he stated, is over. If Air France wants to return, it will stand in line like any other company, without privilege, without special treatment. France is no longer in control. Africa is.